B'ezrat Hashem, today in Masechet Shabbat, we are going to learn Chet Amud Aleph, 8a. We're going to start from Gufa and Zayin Amud Bet, Gufa. We're going to have three sections today. The first section we're going to discuss is this idea of a area that's not 4x4 tefachim being considered an area for Akira and Acha, which we spoke about before actually, the similar sugya before. And then the second section we'll get to is the idea that you cannot be chayav on Shabbat for throwing a reshut. This is a fascinating idea. And the third idea we'll get to today is the idea of a 9 tefach post in reshut harabim that we'll see if it's considered reshut harabim, as well as a 9 tefach ditch or hole. Okay, now we had this yesterday. B'ezrat Hashem, let's get started. We had yesterday this psak, actually it was on Zayin Amud Aleph. The psak was as follows. Rav Chisda taught us, let's just read it inside, Gufa. Amar Rav Chisda taught us, Na'atz kaneh reshut hayachid. Somebody took now just imagine, use your imagination for a second. He took a tall pole, okay, and he knocked it into the reshut hayachid, into the ground. Now it could be 20 feet tall, very tall, whatever it is. V'zarak v'nach al gabav. And then somebody was standing in the reshut harabim. He picked something up, and he has very good aim, very good accuracy, and he threw it exactly on top of the pole. So there's the pole in the reshut hayachid. Someone picks something up from the reshut harabim and throws it on top of that pole. Says Rav Chisda, afilu gavoa me'ama, even if it's 100 amot tall, chayav, he is chayav, mepnei reshut hayachid oleh ad l'rakia. We quoted this yesterday. Because reshut hayachid goes all the way up to Rakia. It goes all the way up to Shamayim. So since around the pole is reshut hayachid, this pole itself is also reshut hayachid. That's the words of Rav Chisda. No, it's not, because it's in reshut hayachid. Oh, but no, what you're pointing out is a good point. What's the area of this pole? It's less than 4x4. Oh, and Rav Chisda says still, since it comes from a reshut hayachid, it extends from reshut hayachid, it's like a reshut hayachid. So the Gemara says it would appear that Rav Chisda holds, if it's in a reshut hayachid, even if the area it lands on is not 4x4 tefachim, it's still considered a reshut hayachid. So based on that, the Gemara says it seems that Rav Chisda would be like the shita of Rebbe, which we actually quoted before, and not like the Rabbanan. Now let's see the case and then we'll explain it. This is very interesting. Leimar Rav Chisda da Amar Karebi. Let's say Rav Chisda, who says if it lands on this area of less than 4x4, it's like reshut hayachid, he would be like Rebbe. The Tanya, because the Braita taught us, we had this earlier. Zarak v'nach al gabe ziz kol shehu. A person picked something up in reshut harabim. Now the way we're understanding it in the Havamim, the way we're understanding it now is, he threw it, and there was in the reshut hayachid a little ziz, is like a protrusion, a little thing sticking out, but it's not 4x4. It's a small little piece sticking out from the wall, but it's in reshut hayachid, okay? Rebbe mechayev, Rebbe says you're chayav, v'chachamim potrim, v'chachamim say you're patur. Now the simple pshat,
from where to where?
They were in reshut harabim. He was standing in reshut harabim. What we're thinking now, hava amina, is that there's a reshut hayachid next to the reshut harabim, and in the reshut hayachid there's a little ziz, but it's in the reshut hayachid. It's all in reshut hayachid. He picked it up in reshut harabim, threw it onto the ziz, and the Rebbe says you're chayav because that's considered akira and reshut hayachid, anachan reshut harabim, and anachan reshut hayachid. The chachamim say you're patur because it landed on something that's less than 4x4. So it would seem this is the machloket, is that Rebbe agrees with Rav Chisda, like Rav Chisda is saying, really, that even though it's not 4x4, it's considered reshut hayachid, and the chachamim say no, it's a ziz in reshut hayachid, but the ziz is not 4x4, so it's not reshut hayachid. This would appear to be the same machloket, and it comes out that Rav Chisda is like the Tana Rebbe and not like the chachamim. Okay?
Again. I didn't really happy. It's good.
The guy's standing in reshut harabim. He picks something up, okay? He throws it towards the reshut hayachid, but it doesn't land on the floor of the reshut hayachid. This is what we're assuming is the case. There's a ziz in the reshut hayachid. So let's imagine there's a wall of the reshut hayachid, but it's all in the reshut hayachid, and a little piece sticking out from it. It's not 4x4. So the Rebbe says, look, that's reshut hayachid. So you're chayav. And the Chachamim say...
Although it's less than 4 by 4.
Exactly. Chachamim say
It
patur.
doesn't land on the floor.
It didn't on the floor.
How we connect this example with what we start?
Because it's the same idea, is even though the area where it lands is not 4 by 4, it's still considered reshut hayachid.
Because the source, it's reshut hayachid.
Exactly. And Rav Chisda's case, it's a different case, but it's the same idea. This pole on top of it's less than 4 by 4, but since it comes from reshut hayachid, it's also considered reshut hayachid.
It's more than 10 by 10 tefachim?
Much more, it's even 100.
The case of Rav Chisda.
It's more than 10 tefachim.
Yeah, 100 amot.
So
Doesn't make a difference.
Potentially.
So the point that we're trying to say is, you see, Rebbe would be the Tana who backs up Rav Chisda the Amora, that even less than 4 by 4 is considered a reshut hayachid if it comes from the reshut hayachid. That's the key.
And Rav Chisda doesn't agree with that?
Rav Chisda does, and that would back up
So
Rav Chisda.
who doesn't
The
agree?
Rabbanan, the Chachamim,
What
do
the
not say,
Rabbanan
they say
say?
patur. They say in this case you're patur. Why are you patur?
Why?
Because it's not 4 by 4. That's not reshut hayachid.
Although it's coming from reshut hayachid.
Exactly.
So
They say patur.
patur for
Yeah.
disease also?
Disease. That's what they're talking about. The
There
case
was
of disease.
disease also patur?
The Chachamim are talking. Rebbe and the Chachamim argue about the case of disease. Rav Chisda says a chidush about this pole. So we're saying is
Rav
the
Chisda
same.
said sover like
Rav
Rebbe.
Chisda, yeah,
So
Rav
like
Chisda would be
Rebbe.
like Rebbe and not like the Chachamim.
There is a difference.
But I want to point
between
out,
Gabon and
we are
no.
assuming, Chevra, we're assuming disease is in the reshut hayachid. We're about to argue on that, but that's what we're assuming.
No,
right
but we assume what about the height?
now. Don't know. Not
Doesn't make difference.
At this point, we're not focused.
But
on
this
it.
is-
It seems like the
Similar idea.
Similar idea.
But this is a different thing than a pole. The pole, this is something that is attached to something. If it's a pole that...
It's also
let's say,
attached.
This pole,
No, let's say it's stuck in.
up to the shamayim.
I'll tell you, strong. You nail it into the ground strong. Cement it in. That's not enough kamina.
If you nailed it to the ground...
You nailed it
in.
and you cemented it in. Whatever it is, make up a case. It's the same thing. It's oto davar.
But how come if you...
I'm telling you, it's not enough kamina here. Here, it's not enough kamina.
So it seems like Rebbe holding like Rav Chisda holding like
Like
Rebbe.
Rebbe, exactly.
Rebbe
Which is
shita.
fine. We could say that. But what the Gemara wants to say, we're going to show is, even Rav Chisda could be like the Rabbanan. Have to figure out how that is. We'll see in a minute.
Like a banana also?
Even like the Rabbanan. So let's see, because we're going to change the
So
case.
it-
That's what we're going to do now. Let's
It's
see.
on both sides.
But let's just read. So some take this out, but we can read it. Al maloba ina makom dalal al dalal. We see that Rebbe holds you don't have to have an area 4 by 4. It's still considered reshut hayachid. So Rav Chisda can hold like Rebbe. Beautiful. Turning to Chet Amud Aleph. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says, now I'll tell you outside, but there's 2 ways that Rashi learns this answer. One way is very similar to how we explained it back on Dalet Amud Bet, but it doesn't fit nicely into the words of the Girsa of the Gemara that we have. Rashi must have had a different Girsa. The second pshat that Rashi says fits better in the words, so we're going to go with the second pshat, how Rashi learns this Gemara. So Abaye says like this, reshut hayachid dekule amalo pligi kedav Chisda. Everybody will agree. If you're talking about in reshut hayachid, meaning he threw it and it landed on Aziz, or in a case where if it was all in reshut hayachid, everybody agrees. If it extends from and it's in reshut hayachid, that's considered a hanacha. That's a reshut hayachid. The Rabbanan will agree to that too. Everybody will agree, which means even the Rabbanan agree to Rav Chisda's case, which is if the pole is in the reshut hayachid, even though it's not 4 by 4. That's considered a hanacha, which means to say, as long as it extends from reshut hayachid and it's in the reshut hayachid, that's considered reshut hayachid, even if it's not 4 by 4.
Okay.
Rabbanan will agree. So what's the machloket then between Rabbanan and Rebbe? It's a different case. Elahacha be'ilan ha'omed reshut hayachid. We spoke about this before, if you remember. We're talking about a tree. The trunk of the tree is in reshut hayachid. V'nofono tel reshut harabim. A branch of the tree extends into the reshut harabim. He picked up an item, v'zarak v'nach anofo. He picked up an item in the reshut harabim and he threw it on the branch. So now it landed on a branch, and the branch is not 4 by 4 tefachim, right? But the branch is connected to the trunk of the tree, which is in a reshut hayachid. The branch is in reshut harabim. So says the Gemara, the Rebbe Savar, Rebbe holds Amrinan Shadinofo Batari Karo, that we throw the branch after the base, which means we look at the branch as if it has the same status as the base. Since the base of the tree is in reshut hayachid, so the branch of the tree is also considered reshut hayachid. So therefore, the size of it doesn't make a difference. The point is, we look at the branch like the trunk of the tree, so it's a reshut hayachid. Even though the branch is in reshut harabim, therefore you're chayev for akiran reshut harabim and anacha reshut hayachid. Rabbanan say no, we don't say the branch follows the trunk, and therefore the branch is in reshut harabim. You did not do an akiran and anacha from reshut harabim to reshut hayachid, and therefore you're not going to be chayav in this case. Now I want to explain something. The way we're explaining that machloket now, it doesn't have to be you threw it 4 amot even. We're just talking about you're right next to the branch of this tree. You pick something up, you throw it onto that, right next to you. According to Rebbe, that's like putting it in reshut hayachid, so you're chayav. According to the Rabbanan, no, that's in reshut harabim, you're not chayav. But everyone will agree, this is what Rabbi is saying, that if the extension is in the reshut hayachid, it's from the reshut hayachid, and it extends from that reshut hayachid, and it's within the reshut, that would be chayav across the board. Everybody will agree that if there's an extension, like the case of Rav Chisda, where there's a pole going up in the reshut hayachid, even if it's not 4x4 tefachim, that's considered reshut hayachid. Exactly, that's considered part of the reshut hayachid. Exactly.
Anything comes from reshut hayachid, disease. Talking about here that somebody saying reshut hayachid, and
but I want to point out an important nekuda about that, because the Rishonim explain over here a very important point. That's only when you already have a reshut hayachid that's established. It means you already have an existing reshut hayachid that's 4x4 tefachim, 10 tefachim tall, whatever it's supposed to be. So then if something extends out of it, it's also reshut hayachid, even if it's not 4x4 tefachim. But to create the reshut hayachid in the first place, it's not going to be reshut hayachid unless it's 4x4 tefachim.
What do you mean?
You can only say that it's less than 4x4 tefachim, but it's reshut hayachid if it extends from a real reshut hayachid that was already established.
What do you mean from real reshut hayachid?
Meaning it has to have the real measurements.
Obviously, we said that.
No, but tishma. The chidush we're saying over here is only true where it comes from a place that's 4x4 tefachim, 10 tefachim tall. Yeah. But to say that it's considered reshut hayachid if it's less than 4x4, when it does not come from such a place like that, that wouldn't be true. It has to be that it comes from a place that's a reshut hayachid that's already been created. That's the point. Right, if you don't understand, it's okay. We can go ahead. It's not.
Wait a second.
I think so. It's obvious.
It's obvious. You're saying it's obvious. It's just a very important nekuda, because you can't create a reshut hayachid without having one. First, you have to have.
How
one.
the pole is having because
it comes from the land, which is reshut hayachid. Exactly. That's exactly the point. Exactly.
Just because it's on a land of reshut hayachid.
Exactly. And therefore, even though it's not 4x4,
if it was reshut harabim, it's different.
That's a different story. That's a different story.
It's become a makom patur.
Either makom patur, carmelit. It would depend how wide it is.
Depends by the height.
Because
if it's
width,
less than 4x4,
width,
and
height.
it's over 10.
I don't want to get there right now because it's confusing. But yes, l'chorah that we either makom patur. That would be what we call reshut la'atzma. Reshut la'atzma. It depends on the width. Okay, but now we get to the complications of the day. Baruch Hashem. Let's get started over here. Look. We know when it comes to Melechet Shabbat, the Isurim are learnt out from what was done in the Mishkan. Okay, this is the big Yisod. Actually, comes up, these Parshiyot, we learn about that. Now, where was Zrika done in the Mishkan? Where did they have an idea of throwing an item from one reshut or one area to another? So Rashi quotes the Gemara later. Okay, that's all within one area though. So the Rashi quotes, very interesting. Rashi quotes is that they were zokim machtin zelazeh. They used to have these little needles that they used to work in the Mishkan, and they would throw one to the other.
Because they don't want to get, I think, to pass tuma or something like that, no?
I'm not sure. That's what Rashi quotes. God willing, towards the end of the Masechta, I think we're going to discuss this more. But they would throw the needles one to the other. Kitzu. Okay? We learn from that a very important point. Now listen good to this, Chevra, because this is going to get very interesting. We learn from that to be chayav on Shabbat for hotza'ah, you have to throw a chefetz from one place to another place. But if you throw a reshut from one place to another place, you're not chayav on Shabbat. It might be asur, but you're not chayav. What do you mean a reshut? How do you throw a reshut? What's an object and what's a reshut? So we know. What's a reshut? What's a reshut on Shabbat? What's a reshut?
4x4 tefachim, 10 feet, 10 tefachim high.
Exactly.
And 4 walls?
Exactly. Well, the walls is true, but let's just stick with the numbers. 100%. Okay. Beautiful. If you throw something that is called a reshut and not a chefetz, you're not chayav on Shabbat. So that means if I pick up, let's say I pick up an item, let's give an example. I pick up a box that is 10 tefachim tall, 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. And then I throw this, give an example, and then I throw it from reshut hayachid to reshut harabim, that's throwing a reshut. That's not like the machatin, that's not like a chefetz, and I'm not going to be chayav in Hilchot Shabbat. Okay. Good? So far so good. Exactly what I said, because in order to be chayav in Shabbat, melechet Shabbat is derived from melechet hamishkan. If it's not the same, you're not chayav. So it has to be that you throw a chefetz, an item, and not something that's called a reshut. Okay. Let's just take that's a rule, okay? Now, here's the story. Were certain baskets they used to have, which was called kaveret. I believe it's a beehive actually. Is kaveret a beehive in Hebrew?
This is also in Hebrew. Kaveret. Those things are kaveret.
I know them as. I'm just saying, in Hebrew I think today
kaveret is also like a cloth.
It is beehive. But the reason it's called beehive is it was shaped like beehive, and I think some Rishonim actually learned they used to store bees and honey inside of it. But what is it? Exactly what Yochai just said. This is a wicker basket, it's called in English. It's a basket that is woven from materials, like you know the material of lulav, they would weave baskets, like similar to how we put those around the lulav, they would make baskets out of this. Yeah. Now, listen to this. Baskets are round, they're not square. Okay. Round, they're not square. Okay, I'm going to draw you a picture in a minute. When you're dealing with something that's round, how do you determine, okay, 10 tefachim tall, I understand.
Well, it's circle.
But how do you determine that it's 4 by 4 tefachim in area? It's not the same determination.
But you can make a calculation for that.
So we're going to make a calculation.
For one.
But let me just explain what we're about to do before we go into it. What we're going to try to figure out is, I understand it's considered a reshut, that if you throw it from one place to another on Shabbat, when it's square, if it's 10 tefachim tall and 4 by 4 tefachim wide, right? I understand that clear. That's easy to determine. But where it's rounded like this basket, and you pick it up and you throw it across to the other reshut, or it's like, for example, how round, or what is the diameter, and I'll explain that in a minute, have to be considered 4 by 4 tefachim. So this is mathematics.
You have to measure the nefach that go inside 4 by 4 by 10.
Exactly.
And then you calculate. There's a way to transfer that for the circle things. That's
excellent. Okay, so look. Beautiful. This marker doesn't work. Let me get a better marker. 1 second.
4 כפול 4 כפול 10.
רגע, I want to use a picture.
16 זה 160 square feet you can fit inside. 4 כפול 4, כמה זה?
16.
כפול 10. 160, אז זה 160 square feet fitting inside these things.
Listen, you're better at math than me. I need a picture. Look, we have here square.
Square, okay.
Okay? We're looking at it, let's say we're looking at it from the top. We're looking at it from the top. Okay, so 4 by 4, and it's 10 tefachim tall. This you'd be patur if you threw it again, because that's considered a reshut. Okay? How much of a circular object, a cylindrical object, would also be considered, I give a picture that I know, that would also be considered a 4 by 4 item. So Rashi explains like this. Let me just explain this outside and I'm going to write it in. Rashi explains that we have a rule. We speak about this in Eruvin, we speak about this in Sukkah, and we speak about it here in terms of this as well. Whenever you're talking about, you want to figure out basically like this. Let me just clarify. If I would draw a circle inside of the square, that's 4 by 4, what would end up happening? You would not have the same area of the square. Everybody understands that? Simple. It's simple because you don't have the corners. So in order to have a circle that encompasses is 4 by 4, you have to draw the circle around the square.
Right.
So let me draw a circle around the square. We understand that, right?
Yeah.
Now it's 4 by 4. So the question is, what is the diameter? The diameter is the key word here. This is the diameter. Diameter is the line that cuts through the circle.
In the middle, yeah.
In the middle. In Hebrew you also say, right? Alachson, exactly. Alachson.
Max.
Exactly. It's actually in triangles, it's called the hypotenuse, And there's a theorem about it, which is called Pythagorean's theorem. In English, there's actually a cheshbon like this. But just
Pythagoras, no.
Exactly. That's what it is.
X plus Y shave Z.
Exactly. So that's how Rashi explains. That Rashi explains based on the Gemara, and it lines up pretty well with that. He says like this: we have to figure out what is the diagonal line across that square to know what is the diameter of this circle that would be considered a reshut if you throw from one place to another. How do we figure that out? So the general rule is you take the width of one of the sides of the square. If it's a perfect square, 4 by 4, you say 4 and you do multiply by 1 2/5. 1 2/5 or 1.4. It's also 1.4. 4 times 1.4 is going to be
5.6.
5.6. So if you have the diameter of a circular object, that's 5.6 tefachim, it will have within it a square that's 4 by 4 tefachim, and that will be considered a reshut if you throw that basket from one reshut to another.
Okay.
Good? Simple enough. Let me drop a picture here for anyone who wants to see. So to be clear, if you have a square that's 4 by 4, that's a reshut. You draw a circle around it. Since 4 times 2/5 or 1.4 is going to be 5.6, so if the diameter is 5.6 in the circle, that's a reshut.
So I don't have to draw a square. I just have to take it from one point to another point.
Exactly.
And do a diameter.
5.6. It's just a way to determine it. That's it. Now Rashi explains that we're going to see in the Gemara, it's going to call it not 5.6, but 6. It's going to say a circular object that's 6. Rashi seems to understand he's just rounding up. It's just the Gemara likes to talk in whole numbers. It's easier to negotiate, to discuss with whole numbers. So it really is 6. It really is 5.6, but it calls it 6.
Is it rounding up or is it this leman asar safek?
Oh no, it's rounding up. Rounding up. L'chora, it's rounding up, yeah. That means if I pick up a basket, which we're talking about over here, this kaveret, and I pick it up, throw it over to reshut harabim, if it's 5.6, that's and 10 tefachim tall, 5.6 in diameter and 10 tefachim tall, that's patur because that's considered throwing a reshut. Okay, that's when I throw it, just to be clear, because we're going to make a chiluk in a minute. When I throw it and it lands on the bottom, like on a base, like it would normally stand. Okay, clear? Let's read that inside now. That's
basically
those
big balls. The
big
bouncy balls, that you can do with them exercise.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Right, so it's like mostly...
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's a good question.
And
that's very interesting. The gym. Good question.
Could be that's a reshut.
By the way, this isn't so much. 10 tefachim tall. You know what I'm saying? It's not very tall.
It's like these balls.
No, the balls it's a little bit...
But how you measure it, like you say, you take it from one to another.
Yeah, exactly. The farthest point from one point to the other. Exactly. Basically cut it in half. That's basically what it is. Okay, let's see. Says the Gemara. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says like this. Zarak kaveret reshut harabim. If a person standing in reshut hayachid, he picks up one of these woven baskets that's rounded, and he throws it to reshut harabim. Gavoa yud, if it's 10 tefachim tall, ve'ena rachba vav, but it's not 6 tefachim wide, meaning the diameter is not 6 tefachim, chayav. So then you're chayav. Why are you chayav? Because that's like throwing a chefetz. Since it's under 6 tefachim, it's not a reshut, and therefore it's like throwing a chefetz, and you're chayav in Hilchot Shabbat. Rochba vav, but if it is 6 tefachim, which Rashi says really means 5.6, but if it's 6 or more, so then chayav patur. You're patur. Why are you patur? Because that's like throwing a reshut. It's not like the machtin in the Mishkan. Beautiful. That is the position of Abaye. Now Rava argues. I'm going to explain to you outside why Rava argues, and then we'll see it inside. How is this basket made? It's made, like we said, weaving together this, not tzarim. How do you say that in English? It's like a grass, basically. Grasses or plant material. The way they would do it is they had the sheti and the arev, right?
Okay.
Sheti and erev. Thank you. Sheti is the height that goes up, and the erev is the one that goes horizontally, vertical and horizontal. So Rava says like this: if you have a basket that's 10 tefachim tall, whenever they would weave these, they would always leave a little bit at the top of it, at the rim, extra. Why would they leave a little extra? It was not usable, but they would leave that little bit extra because if it was exactly flush, it would come undone. It's the same thing when you make the wrap, those little, you tie up the lulav around it, you make a little extra because if it wouldn't be, it would all become undone. So says Rava like this: if you threw such a basket from reshut hayachid to reshut ha'abim, so the halacha is going to be, even if it's less than 6, you're still going to be patur. Meaning, that's still not going to be chayav. Why are you going to be patur? Because he says like this, to be chayav on Shabbat, the item has to go entirely from one reshut to the other reshut, legamre. The problem is, because there's a little bit on top of the basket that sticks up above 10 tefachim, and what did you say, Matan? Above 10 tefachim off the reshut ha'abim is makom la'atzma. That's the reshut la'atzma. Either it's a makom petur or it's a karmelit. So you're not chayav, even if it's like a chifetz. It's the measurement of a chifetz, because some of it will stick out of what's called reshut ha'abim.
It's like you throw 85% of the chifetz.
Exactly, you're not chayav for exactly. You're not chayav for that.
In the chayav, the entire
99% of the chifetz.
The entire reshut have to be thrown.
The whole thing has to go to the other reshut.
So what about if it's less than 10 tefachim?
Then you could be chayav. You could be chayav.
So it's a big deal.
Exactly. The little bit makes a big difference. Wow. Let's see that inside. So Rava argues in Abai. Let's see that inside. Rava says, Afilu eina rochba vav, even if it's not 6 tefachim in its diameter, patur, you're still going to be patur. My time, what's the reason? Because efshar lekromiyot shel kaneh, the slivers of the kaneh, of the reeds, means the ends that reach above 10 tefachim, shelo ya'alu lemala me'asara. And like I said, since it's going to reach above 10 tefachim, that's a different reshut. It didn't go ligamre into the reshut ha'abim, so you're going to be patur. Now, Abai argues on this. Gemara doesn't speak it out here, but Abai argues because he says that's considered going legamri into the reshut ha'abim. Why? Because nobody cares about those things on the top of that basket. So that's considered not important, and therefore the basket went into the reshut ha'abim.
Make a lot of sense.
That's how Abai argues on Rava here.
Because nobody cares about this extra.
Exactly.
אתה יודע מה זה, הטיפה הזה שנשאר בחוץ. הרי wasn't machine, it's human being make it. Machine make it completely today like smooth. But back then they finished, they tied it, and קוץ כזה עולה למעלה. הקוץ הזה גם אין לו תפקיד, ונobody care about it, nobody אין לו...
Exactly. Good, clear? Good, Abai, Rava, good. And now I'll get a little bit technical here. Listen to this. This was where you pick up the basket, and you throw it, and it lands on the bottom of the basket, like it would normally stand up, okay? Now, when it's standing up like that...
You're getting to 10.
Well, it gets to 10, fine. You need it, if it would be 10 tefachim tall, so then it would be considered throwing a reshut, and you'll be patur. Oh, one second. What if you turn it over? So now it lands on the rim, it lands on the top of it. Now listen to this. If you turn it over, now what you're dealing with is actually called mechitzot, because the walls of the basket are called mechitzot. They're like walls in halacha. When you throw it, normally it lands in the bottom. That's not mechitzot because the bottom of the basket separates between the walls and the ground. But when you turn it over and throw it and it lands on the top of it, on the rim, here, listen good.
Yeah, reshut.
We look, but listen. The walls of the basket are called mechitzot. Lamay nafka mina. Why is that important? Because we have halacha. When it comes to mechitzot, this comes up in Sukkah, this comes up in Eruvin, this comes up in Shabbat. There's a concept called lavud, which we've spoken about before. When you deal with mechitzot, the way we look at it is, if it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, it's as if those walls go all the way down to the ground. Okay. So let me just explain that for a second. That means if I would turn over the basket and throw it that way into the reshut ha'abim, when it's 2.9 tefachim away from the ground, 2.9 tefachim, we look at it as if it stops right there. Because it's already considered as if it extends all the way to the ground. Okay? Even though it's in the air, it's looked at as if it's attached to the ground already, and the basket extends to the ground. Okay? Now I want to just point out, there is a concept of lavud that exists by other items that are not baskets, but the way that Rashi explains it, Rashi says actually we don't say lavud, but the Chazon Ish explains, we look at it as if the ground rises, not that the basket goes down. I don't want to get into that right now because that's very technical. But the bottom line is, to say lavud, it needs to be a mechitza. If you throw the basket normal way, the bottom of the basket separates between the walls and the floor, you don't say lavud. But where you turn it over, and the walls of the basket are now mechitzot, so now we would look at it as lavud the moment it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, which would mean...
More than 10 tefachim.
Listen to this. Which would mean, listen to the math now. You know what? I'm going to draw it. What is this here? Can I draw? Yeah, I want to draw this out. Look, which would mean, let's say, here's the ground, and this is 10 tefachim. Okay, this is the ground, and this is 10 tefachim. Now I threw a basket. Okay, that's the basket. I turned it over and I threw it like that.
That one is way right now.
Now look, this is 2.9 tefachim. 2.9 tefachim to the ground, okay? And now, the basket itself, as we'll see, is 7.5 tefachim. Okay, look. So what the Gemara is going to say, amazing chidush. Since it's looked at as if it extends to the ground, so in such a case, it's already looked at as 10 tefachim already, even if it hasn't yet reached the ground, because the mechitzot, we use the principle of lavud as if it extends to the ground even before it lands.
Okay.
So therefore, if it was 7.5 tefachim, not even 10 tefachim, already it would be as if it goes into the next reshut and you would not be chayav. So in order to be chayav in this case, it would have to be, as the Gemara calls it, 7 and a little. If it's just 7 and a little, like 7.1, let's say.
Because it's never going to be
so then it's within 10 tefachim.
Even
still.
if you take in the way that you calculate it, when he's on his way, he's still landing on the ground before 3.
Exactly.
Wow. It's really like that?
Let me say it over again, 1 second. If it's within 3 tefachim, we say lavud because it's mechitzot that extends to the ground. If it's 7.5 tefachim, it's already above 10 tefachim. It's as if you threw it, but it's in a different reshut. You're not going to be chayav. But if it was less, if it was 7.1, for example, so then it would still be maximum 10 tefachim. You could be chayav for the hotza'ah from reshut hayachid to reshut harabim. Why? Because the imaginary halacha of lavud tells you that even where it's in middle of the air, it's as if it already extended to the ground and it's nach, it's already sitting there, and therefore you'll be patur even if it's not 10 tefachim by itself, really. Let's read that inside and I'll explain it again. Big
but
chiddush.
it's a very confusing calculation.
Let me read it again and then I'll explain it again.
It's the same item that was before, 10 tefachim height, just because it fell on a different side and now it's
exactly. That's the chidush, is that where you throw it on its base, on the bottom. No,
you're
right,
but
you're
it's
right.
the same item.
Where you throw it on its base, it's not called mechitzot to say lavud.
If it was an item is lower than it.
Exactly.
It's a different scenario, but
so
because it fell on a different side.
Says the Gemara, kafa'al pia, if he turned it over on its rim, and then he threw it, so shivau mashahu, if the basket was 7.1 chayav, because then it won't go beyond 10 with lavud. Shivau mechza, but if it's 7.5, it really could be a little less than 7.5. Just an example, patu, because now it's going to be more than 10 tefachim based on the usage of lavud. That's the psak the Gemara tells us. Why? Because when it's landing on its base, you can't say lavud, it's not mechitzot. But when it's landing on its face, on the rim, it's considered lavud, as those are mechitzot. Now Rav Ashi argues on this. Rav Ashi says like this, Rav Ashi Amar, afilu shiva umechza chayav. Even if it's 7.5, you're still going to be chayav. Now Rav Ashi says you can't say lavud over here. You can't say lavud.
Why?
Lavud is a rule we say when you have mechitzot, you have walls. This would be looked at as walls if it's used in its normal way. The normal way a basket is turned right side up, meaning with the bottom on the bottom and then the walls facing up, because it's supposed to hold something. So he says, if you flip it over like that, that's the not normal use. That's not mechitzot that you could use the rule of lavud. So therefore, if you threw it, even if it's 7.5, we don't look at it as if lavud occurs, causing it to be above 10 tefachim. Let me just finish 1 second. Afilu shiva umechza chayav. My time, what's the reason? Mechitzot letochan asuyot, because the walls are made for containing something. So this is a abnormal usage of those mechitzot, and you can't call those mechitzot for lavud.
So according to Rav Ashi, if you really throw a little house and it's sending like that, you chayav.
A little house.
A little really a wall.
The dollhouse for a year.
Yeah, and was that built to.
But again, it would be the same problem because,
Why?
well, for sure you're chayav. Oh, you're saying if it's
because according to Rav Ashi, why mechayav you? Because it's
you can't say lavud if it's being used in the wrong way.
Because this is really
you're saying,
to contain something.
Yes,
it's a clean.
Yes.
But if you throw something that really was to begin with, and you throw it like that, you're falling.
Real walls, and it falls that way. But again, he might say the same thing because there it's meant to be right side up to contain something, not to be flipped over.
No, you don't flip it over.
But it did. So
you don't flip it. You really have it something, 4 walls, roof.
Okay, I hear. No, you're right. Yes, you're right. I agree with you. Agreed.
The only reason that he can knock off this because he said this mechitzot wasn't built to live with wood content. It's a kli.
Meaning not to be flipped over.
Exactly.
When you're saying a dollhouse, if it has a roof and walls and there's open on the bottom, you maybe would be chayav. 100%. I agree. That's what Rav Ashi with the Chorah hold. Excellent. All right, let's move on. Now, this is the third section. This is a lot easier. Don't worry. So Amar Ula, that was the complication. Baruch Hashem, I think it was not too bad. Let's see. Amar Ula. Let's go ahead here. Ula says. What's that? Yeah. No, but this is a little confusing. The numbers and the different, you know. I know I do bit sefer. Amar Ula. Amar Ula says Ula. All right, now we get back to the basic halachot here. We have like this. You have reshut ha'abim. Okay, so Matan, we were just speaking about this. If you have in reshut ha'abim, we spoke about this the other day. If you have some sort of a platform in reshut ha'abim, so we said if it's 3 tefachim, less than 3 tefachim, let's say like that, what's the halacha? It's batel to the reshut ha'abim. That's considered part of the ground.
But if it's within 3 tefachim, it's not lavud?
So you don't even have to say it. It's just considered. It's part of the reshut ha'abim. Let's just say.
Okay.
Between 3 and 9 tefachim, what's the halacha? Between 3 and 9. So that's considered Carmelit, maybe.
Depends by the.
Exactly. Let's say Carmelit. It's considered off the ground already, and then above 10 tefachim would be considered
Makom
Patur, or maybe reshut hayachid if it's big enough. That gets into fine. What Ula is about to tell us is there's this sweet spot, this exact number that would be considered, it's above 3, but it's still considered part of reshut ha'abim.
What is it again?
It's an exact number that if it's this high off the ground, it's used for the public usage in normal travel, and that's considered part of reshut ha'abim. What am I talking about? 9 tefachim off the ground. If you have a post, beam, 9 tefachim off the ground, says
from
Ula.
the ground and up.
Exactly. Reshut ha'abim. You have a post that's 9 tefachim off the ground. Post is a amud.
Okay.
Amud, a pillar. 9 tefachim off the ground. This will be considered reshut ha'abim. Why it's so far off the ground? The answer is because people used to use these pillars for unloading their bags. They would arrange their bags on it. So this is what we could call, like we said before, nachtash mishteh. It's part of the use of reshut ha'abim, and therefore that's also considered chelek of reshut ha'abim. What?
Why don't call it from reshut? It's in reshut ha'abim.
Oh, it is in reshut ha'abim. But sometimes, as we're about to learn, if it's a certain amount of space off the ground and it's not usable as reshut ha'abim, it's for, like we said, 3 tefachim off the ground, you go around it, or you don't. That might not be considered reshut ha'abim, actually. But this, because exactly 9 tefachim, we'll see, is considered something that the public uses normally. Meaning, as we're going to explain, you unload, it's like you said, the fire hydrant, but meaning, I can't think of, maybe the bus stop. The bus stop might be a good example. Those seats, when you're walking, you might put something down on it naturally. It's an easy use. If it's a little bit lower, it's harder to use it, to pick up and to put down. But 9 tefachim was the normal thing. That's a chelek of reshut ha'abim. Okay? So which would mean then, if somebody picks something up in reshut ha'abim, throws it 4 amot and it lands on that, you'll be chayav, because that's considered reshut ha'abim. If it lands on something that's 4 tefachim though, you won't be chayav, because that's not considered reshut ha'abim. Just to explain. We're going to do a little bit of a review now of the halachot we've learned. So Amar Ula says like this. Amud Tesha reshut ha'abim. If you have a pillar, post, that's 9 tefachim in reshut ha'abim, v'rabim mekatvin alav, and the public, they put their bags on it, like lashon ketef, meaning they take it on their shoulder, put it off their shoulder. That's a normal place they adjust their bags with. V'zarak, and he picked something up in reshut ha'abim, through 4 amot, v'nach al gabav, and it landed on this 9 tefach amud. Chayav, you're chayav. My time, what's the reason? He says like this. He gives us a review of the topic. Look at this. Pachot mishlosha, if it's less than 3 tefachim, midras darsi be le'rabim. Everybody steps on it. So that's pashut, that's considered reshut ha'abim. That's not a question. Mishlosha v'ad teisha, 3 tvachim till 9 tvachim. Lo midras darsile, people don't step on it. V'lo ktufei michtifi, so they don't step on it. They'll avoid stepping on it, but they also don't put their bags, because to put a bag, it means you have to lower yourself, and that's not comfortable. So that would be reshut la'atzma. And now, like we said, either that's going to be Carmelit or it's going to be Makom Petur, but that's not going to be Reshut Harabim. If it's, let's say, the area is less than 4 Tfachim. Oh. But it's not Reshut Harabim because that's not convenient usage for the public. But Teisha, this is the Chidush of Ula. If it's exactly 9 Tfachim, Vadai Mekatvi Iluya, people do put their bags and adjust their bags on it. So that's considered a Chelek of Reshut Harabim. If you throw from Reshut Harabim, it lands on that, you'll be Chayav. Okay, good.
Even though it's 4x4?
Exactly.
It's not reshut hayachid?
Yes, because reshut hayachid is 10 tefachim.
Oh.
10 tefachim.
If it's 9.
Right, that's a different story. You're right. By the way, Matan's pointing out good. If it's 10 tefachim or more, then it's a different reshut, either reshut hayachid, or if it's less than 4x4, maybe makom petur. You get into also
4x4, and it's part of reshut harabim. In the reshut harabim, let's say the bus station is above 10 tefachim height, and it's over 4x4.
Yeah.
Because if we consider the cement as one reshut,
that would not be considered part of the reshut harabim. Exactly. What it is exactly, it's something else.
So yeah, chayav for akira and anacha.
That's a good
no. Because you put your bag.
Okay, that's if it would be reshut hayachid. That would be a different question. But let's. Yeah.
אם הלכת לתחנת אוטובוס והספסלים הם יותר גבוהים 10 טפחים.
I want to just finish up. Get to the examples later because you guys have to go to work. I don't want to do too long. Amalei Abai Rav Yosef. So Abai says to Rav Yosef, beautiful. So you're telling me if there's a pillar that's 9 tfachim, that's considered chelek of reshut harabim. So Abai asks Rav Yosef, what about the opposite? What about if there's a whole 9 tfachim deep? Remember, we learned reshut hayachid is 10 tfachim tall or 10 tfachim deep. The question he's asking is, are you saying that it's a chelek of reshut harabim if it's 9 tfachim tall, but it's not true if it's 9 tfachim deep? Now really, what's the question? Why is it considered part of reshut harabim? Because they use it, they put their bags, etc. So holes in the ground people could also use to put something inside of. So is 9 tfachim deep also considered a chelek of reshut harabim or not? That was the question Abaye asked Rav Yosef.
The depth of 9 tfachim, how?
I guess they used to put certain things inside of it. That's what it sounds like.
Obviously, because you're measuring from the okay, so you can go deeper for 100 tfachim.
So it sounds like if it was deeper than that, perhaps people would use it more comfortably. We're going to get into that now.
No, exactly. Nothing about comfortably or no.
Yeah. Convenient.
The measurement is probably from the ground level, not from the...
So let's see. Meaning the whole svara of a 9 tefach amud is that it's used by the public. So does the same thing apply for a guma or not? That's the question. Exactly. It's not okay, but meaning that it's reshut harabim, exactly, because you'll be chayav if you throw in, exactly.
Yeah. The example that we gave, if you're doing like if you dig one
tefach, right? In reshut hayachid, right. You see.
Is it change it to a reshut hayachid?
Exactly, that was the example we spoke about.
You change it to reshut
hayachid. It does. We said it does. There it does. Yes, you could definitely make a change.
That's in case you have walls.
It's a different story, right? Amalei Abai Rav Yosef. Gumamai. What about if you have a hole that's 9 tfachim deep? Is that also reshut harabim or not? So Amalei Rav Yosef said, "B'chein beguma." It's the same thing. People use those gumot. Apparently, they use these holes for putting things inside of, storing things. I guess it was similar to how they put things in the chorei reshut harabim, like we discussed yesterday. They would put things inside of these holes. That's also public function. So if somebody would pick something up in reshut harabim and throw it into that hole, you're chayav if it traveled 4 amot, because that's reshut harabim to reshut harabim on Shabbat. But Rava argues, and he says, beguma lo. The hole is not considered reshut harabim. That's considered makom la'atzma. My time, what's the reason? Because tashmish al yedei adchak lo shmei tashmish. If it's something that could be used, but in a difficult way, a not comfortable way, not a convenient way, that's not called tashmish. So therefore, maybe people used to put things in there when it's 9 tfachim, but it's not comfortable, it's not convenient, and therefore Rava says that's not considered reshut harabim. That would be considered reshut la'atzma, either Carmelit, or you could call it makom petur, but it's not considered a reshut harabim. Fine. Now, so the Gemara says the problem. The Gemara posed the question against Rava. So we'll go one question on Rava. We'll stop, and then tomorrow we'll pick up more questions. So Rav Adamar Matna asked the question against Rava from a Braita. The Braita says as follows: If a person had a box and it was placed in the reshut harabim, Gavoa Asara v'rochba Dalet. It was 10 tefachim tall, 4 by 4 tefachim wide. So it's a box in reshut harabim, but it's reshut hayachid.
It's basically reshut by itself.
Exactly, it's a reshut hayachid. Ein metaltelin lo mitocha reshut harabim. You can't carry from it to reshut harabim because that would be reshut hayachid to reshut harabim. Velo reshut harabim letocha. Nor can you take something in the reshut harabim and put inside of it.
Aval al gaba.
I'm not getting into that now. But the point is, that would be hotza'ah either from inside of it to the public or public inside of it because that's reshut hayachid. Pachot mikan, says the Braita, but if it was less than this, which means if it was less than 10 tefachim or less than 4 tefachim wide, metaltalim, you could carry from inside of it. Now, what do you mean metaltalin? So Rashi explains, you could carry from inside of it, and there's a chidush here, we have to say, this is not considered a karmelit, even though it has the requisite measure for that. Rashi explains because it's a kli, it's considered batil to the reshut harabim, we don't look at it as a separate item. But what's the point? The Braita finishes off, v'chein beguma. It's the same thing with a hole. Now the simple pshat seems to be, just like with a box that's less than 10 tefachim, it's 9 tefachim, it's not considered carrying because it's considered reshut harabim, so too beguma, that would be considered also part of reshut harabim. If you learn the v'chein beguma is going back on the seifa, just like 9 tefachim is considered part of reshut harabim, the guma 9 tefachim is also considered part of reshut harabim. Kashan Rava. So the Gemara answers, my laba seifa. The Gemara asks, isn't it going on the seifa? The Gemara says, la resha. No, it's talking about the resha. Guma, that's 10 tvachim deep and 4 by 4 tvachim, that's considered reshut hayachid. But 9 tvachim, maybe that's not considered part of reshut harabim. We're not talking about that when we're comparing the box and the guma.
But what about the no nichal tashmishe? Because we don't really.
So that's the machloket, exactly.
We don't really. Bishat Adchak doesn't call tashmishe.
Correct. That's Rav's shita. But Abaye disagrees. Abaye says, tachlis, since it's used like reshut harabim, even though it's al yedei adchak perhaps, still considered part of reshut harabim. Okay, we're going to stop here. We'll pick up tomorrow with another question against Rava. We're going to go through a couple of questions. Zat Hashem. Fevra, Yom Tov, Baruch.